with Kevin Meehan, who is an integrative practitioner in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He's been seeing patients for over 40 years, close to it, and he has a topic that he'd like to discuss today with us. And thank you for joining me, Kevin.
Sure. How are you, Danielle?
I'm doing well.
Good, good. So the topic I'd like to discuss today is something that has received a lot of attention, particularly recently in the media, and it's menopause. There's so many different variables on what people think menopause is or should be, or what they presume it is. And obviously, I can't address all the subjects on because they're subjective, but I can address it as much as possible from a biological or biochemical sense, and maybe we can help sort some of the things out here that might be helpful for a lot of people, a lot of our viewers. So
that'd be great.
Okay. So basically, go ahead.
Take it away.
So basically, menopause, as many people know, is a complete cessation of the menstrual cycle or the periods, and it's permanent. It's not something that would be intermittent, which could signify other problems or complications like dysmenorrhea or amenorrhea or things like that that are associated when women are generally in a state of peri or even before perimenopause. So the question or questions that generally arrive, at least to me, are basically how to treat menopause correctly. Are we addressing it correctly? And what the term correctly is obviously widely distributed and has many variables. But basically, many people, as we know, many women experience different forms of menopause. Some women move through it quite easily. Some women never experience vaginal dryness or hot flashes or emotional fluctuations, night sweats, that kind of thing. But basically, overall, generally, when we talk about health in general and menopause, we're talking about situations like, osteoporosis, as an example, cardiovascular problems, things like this that we've heard associated with menopause. The question, Danielle, becomes evident about the treatment of menopause and how we are socially accepting it or how it's medically being approached. And the question primarily here is about the treatment protocols. Are they really appropriate in many cases for the long-term health of a woman who has experienced menopause itself and basically postmenopause, even perimenopause or premenopause? So basically, that's the topic, is how we address it health-wise. What are we doing? Are we doing something that's substantially correct as far as long-term health gains when we talk about hormone replacement therapy and things like that? And that's the question. The big elaboration is hormone replacement therapy correct? Is it a correct avenue, particularly for the long-term health of women who have gone through menopause?
And that's a big question, because hormone replacement therapy can alleviate a lot of the symptoms. So, but I don't know that makes it the right approach.
Exactly.
It is, again, it's going to be that, yeah.
Exactly, because a lot of the medications that are used, HRT, they're basically menopause hormonal therapy, is generally MHT, is the use of estrogen, as an example, progesterone, and in some cases androgens like testosterone to maintain sexual activity. Is MHT good for preventing osteoporotic fractures, as an example? Is it effective for cardiometabolic problems, diseases, and things like that, or breast cancer. We
Right.
have seen in studies that the use of hormone replacement therapy can elevate the potential for breast cancer in some cases. And this gets to be a concern for many women over the long term. Is it
Mm-hmm.
correct? Is it correct adding testosterone as a hormone therapy regarding positive effects for sexual function? But what is the long-term use of an anabolic like testosterone? So, and let me back up a little bit here. We have, when we look at social attitudes in general about menopause,
Mm-hmm.
Japan, menopause, the word menopause was not even a term. It's just
Mm.
recent
Mm.
because it wasn't really significant, or it wasn't considered a significant problem in the traditional society. Not only there, but in South America, as an example, and other countries, uh, menopause was considered generally a time of relief from the childbearing years.
Mm.
So the social construct of what we've done in the US and in the United Kingdom has been to implement and impound a specific dialogue about menopause, of the negativity of menopause, and how women, it's almost as if women should feel guilty for going through menopause, which is a travesty, as many of us know. It's a natural process that women go through, and the process, in my personal opinion, can be experienced without the difficulty and the challenges that we're seeing in Western medicine or Western societies. And
That's
a lot
yeah.
of that has to do actually with diet. We've touched on this before. We can
Mm-hmm.
elaborate symptoms of menopause.
Mm-hmm.
Smoking tobacco is an example, drinking alcohol, the consumption of dairy products. Dairy products are enriched with high amounts of hormones,
Right.
and a lot of these different types of products that are ingested can actually make menopause symptoms worse. So I feel that we've created this dialect that menopause is a negative, and it's like it's coming. Here comes the horror show, and the husbands have to batten down the hatches, so to speak, for the impending storm. When in reality, menopause, in my personal opinion, can be experienced in a very smooth transitional manner.
So I hear what you're saying, but I also think that some of the negative, and I think you kind of answered it, but there's a lot to it. But menopause can be brutal for women. It can be very uncomfortable and very disruptive for people, and they feel like they're losing their minds. And I mean, I'm not there yet, so I can't speak from experience, but I've read stories where people just think they're going crazy, or they're in so much pain, or they have so much fatigue, or they gain a lot of weight, and, you know, they are looking for solutions. And so I think there is a bit of a negative bias in society because of that general, very general, and not everyone has that experience, but a very general sort of experience of the whole process.
Mm-hmm. Now, to your point, as I mentioned before, what's happened in societies where menopause, the symptoms of menopause are amplified. And this
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm
Right,
discussing. So I think it's
right,
very important to approach this from a very preventive aspect, meaning
right, right,
let's take care of our diet. Let's take
right,
care of what we put into our system. Let's
right,
make sure
right.
we're maintaining a health condition that
Yep,
allows us to go through this stage of
right,
life in a smooth manner. Uh,
right.
Now, SSRIs are given substantially higher with women that are going through menopause because of the emotional uh, uh,
Component of it,
condition.
for sure.
Exactly.
Which is asked backwards. I'm sorry, excuse my language, but that's just wrong. It's not
Exactly.
addressing the issue.
Exactly. So all we're doing is basically covering up and making a
Mm-hmm.
condition worse for women in their
Right.
long-term health,
Right.
rather than addressing it and saying, listen, let's make this a
Right.
a situation to where we can smoothly transgress or move through this process without
Right.
an elaboration of any difficult symptoms. And
Right.
that's the point that I'm trying to convey.
Right.
Gabapentin is now being used besides
Mm-hmm.
SSRIs for mental
Mm-hmm.
complications and things like that. And obviously the discomfort that some women go through with, as we mentioned before, hot flashes, night sweats, and all of these
Mm-hmm.
different scenarios. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important to really address the health overall with women and how we
Mm-hmm.
can approach that in a very
Mm-hmm.
positive manner so they don't experience these symptoms that could be
Mm-hmm.
a catastrophe for many, as you correctly brought up.
Right. Now, are you completely against using any kind of estrogen or testosterone or
I
progesterone?
am.
Um,
And
okay.
I'm against any anabolic being used. I am more in favor of using things like natural types of phyto-hormones, as an example, like soy, as an example,
Mm-hmm.
things like
Okay.
that, which I feel is more favorable. Look at bioidenticals as an example, but a bioidentical that is plant derived can
Mm-hmm.
achieve a lot of beneficial things, particularly with women that are having more struggles with their
Mm-hmm.
health and the symptoms of menopause than other women who may have been more cognizant about, you know, their health before reaching that
Right.
particular period of
Right.
life.
So here's a question for you. If someone is, and I think if someone is really not taking care of their diet and not eating perhaps the way they should, or eating or drinking more alcohol, eating more sugar, and then they start to, as they approach perimenopause and they have these symptoms, is it too late for them? Can they make the adjustments and they will see a benefit?
I
What are your thoughts on that?
I personally feel it's never too late
Yeah.
to take advantage of something like this. If a
Mm-hmm.
woman has neglected her health in general, then I feel
Mm-hmm.
it's still not too late to
Mm-hmm.
address menopause and the symptoms, if it's
Mm-hmm.
peri, post, pre-menopause, whatever.
At
I
any
think
point, yeah.
exactly. Because remember, it's important to understand we want to protect bone health in women.
Mm-hmm.
We want to protect the tissue, such as the
Mm-hmm.
receptors in the cells in the breast and in
Right.
other areas, from potential cancers that can crop up from using these HRTs, or hormone replacement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my
Mm-hmm.
concern. My
Right.
primary concern, Danielle, is the clinical use of these hormones that
Mm-hmm.
literally doesn't, there is no sense of a thermostat, meaning the thermostat doesn't know when to shut off or when
Mm-hmm.
to basically increase, due to the fact of a variation in metabolism and the variation in the biology of what's going on in a woman going through menopause.
Right. And then what would you say to people who advocate for hormone replacement therapy, as it relates to cardiovascular protective benefits, to brain benefits, brain protection? As that estrogen drops, there's some idea that it can cause more issues like the ones I've mentioned. Do you feel like that's false, or it's a small percentage, or again, the positives outweigh the negatives?
If you're referring to hormone replacement therapy and the increase of potential cancer, that is not false. That is something that has been predicated in research.
Right. No, I'm actually thinking of the opposite, where by having a drop in estrogen, you're actually, um, there's an increase in cardiovascular disease. There's an increase in, I'm, I'm drawing a blank here, but there are a few things where there's actually the estrogen acts as a protective element in a woman's physiology, and when that level drops, then you open yourself up to the risk of those kinds of issues.
Well, and that's in question too. Some people
Mm-hmm.
suggest that even a drop in estrogen, a drop in progesterone, which, by the way, estrogen at times can even spike during
Right.
postmenopause
Yeah.
or premenopause.
Right.
And what happens is that stores itself in the fat, the adipose.
Mm. Mm.
So there is some debate on
Mm-hmm.
if indeed those spikes and that diminishment of the hormone actually is protective.
Mm.
Some individuals actually feel, or some researchers feel, that it actually is the natural protective route for a woman. Because if estrogen continued at its high pace, then there's a
Mm-hmm.
greater potential for more cancer-induced conditions.
Right. I mean, it would make sense that nature in its evolution would allow for the process to be not detrimental for someone's health, just the natural decline as you age, that your estrogen drops, and then it doesn't necessarily create these problems. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's probably safe to say that that again, our societal habits, our diet, our different things contribute to these more than perhaps the drop in estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you were talking about bioidentical hormones, and so let's let's talk about that. So you talk about soy, and in what forms do you think soy can be beneficial?
As far as anything prepared, like tofu or
Mm-hmm.
miso, soy like edamame or anything like that, because it's important to understand that the isoflavone is the derivative that is found in soy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the
Mm-hmm.
only. You'll find it high in sprouts. Alfalfa sprouts is an example. Chickpeas. It's not
Mm-hmm.
the only food source as an isoflavone. And
Mm-hmm.
isoflavones, because of their group, their location on a phenyl group, and I'm not going to get too biochemical here, is known to
Mm-hmm.
be actually protective in many cases. And we've seen this in traditional cultures that have used high amounts
Mm-hmm.
of
Right.
soy consumption.
Right.
The
Right.
Asian countries is an example. And
Right.
it's important to understand that people that today, their diet eliminates many things that are high in isoflavones, such as green beans, chickpeas, soy.
Mm.
And soy has received, unfortunately, a bad rap for being it's phytoestrogen, but the phytoestrogen that sometimes can be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
People actually think it's actually detrimental in a
Right.
situation uh, in or postmenopause, premenopause, that type of thing. When indeed
Mm-hmm.
it's actually protective. We're finding more research that suggests this. And
Mm-hmm.
it gets back to the traditional societies.
Mm-hmm.
We can learn a lot from those traditional societies if we
Yeah,
are
I think
mindful
so.
and look at it and say, well, listen, why is Japan, there was a lack of a term for menopause. This has been
Right.
happened,
Right.
and now
Right.
it's just recent that they're coming up with, and still at this point,
Mm-hmm.
Japanese women generally have lower symptoms of menopause. They might
Mm-hmm.
describe menopause as stiff neck, stiff back, muscle pain, that type of thing, but nowhere near what we see in America or
Right.
in
Right.
Britain.
Right.
And it, once again, the correlation, we've talked about this before, we've elaborated on this before in past podcasts. Diet has a
Mm-hmm.
fundamental purpose in
Mm-hmm.
our general health. And
Mm-hmm.
is it worth the seconds in your mouth to taste the sweet or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth exchanging that for the years of
Yeah.
difficulty that is
Right.
more than likely to occur if we're not
Mm-hmm.
attentive to our health through our
Right.
dietary process or
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to touch on one thing I think that's important that you, I think, are addressing in kind of a sidebar, but that's that we're talking about whole, what, minimally processed forms of soy. So we're talking about tofu, we're talking about edamame, We're talking about things like that. We're not talking about isolated soy protein,
Mhm.
soy granules,
Mhm.
this manufactured pseudo food kind of stuff that's made out of soy. We're talking about traditional foods made of soy, miso, for instance.
Mhm.
It's fermented. It retains its nutritional qualities, and it's just not over processed.
Mhm.
And so there is a difference, and it's important to seek those out versus trying to buy some kind of fake soy product.
Exactly. And even more importantly, a general overall whole diet that is helpful.
Right,
Because remember,
right.
the 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 few foods I mentioned with isoflavones, there's many. I just haven't mentioned
Mm,
it because of the amounts that are
right.
are found in these types of plant
Mm-hmm.
sources. Uh, but really, once
Right.
again, attention to a diet is, in my opinion, very paramount here when we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the life experience of
Mm-hmm.
menopause. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
soy sauce, if it's tamari, has
Right.
isoflavones. I mean,
Right.
any
Right.
anything like this, or tempeh, or
Mm-hmm.
and any of the, you can garner from so many vegetables. It's just in smaller amounts, and I've only elaborated on the ones with a richer
Mm-hmm.
source.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important. Number one, a few key points here, Danielle. Number one,
Okay.
from a society prospect or a society viewpoint, menopause should not be something that should be looked at with shame, or anything that is like a disease. Or it's not a disease, it's a natural process of life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
um,
Right.
and that's what's important. Number one. Number two is dealing with this natural process of life, just like giving birth to a child.
Mm-hmm.
It's dealing with it, how we can go through it in a much more convenient manner. But more importantly, out of convenience becomes health long term. How do you
Mm.
protect yourself against cancer, cardiovascular problems, things
Mm-hmm.
that we see occur, and obesity? That's
Mm-hmm.
another thing, and we've touched on that in a former podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The obesity rate increases when the diet remains in a basic, how can I say this, inappropriate format, which is important for our health. And I think most people, viewers, will understand what I'm talking about in
Mm-hmm.
this format, being continual, sugar foods, sodas. It's almost as if humans are deliberately torturing themselves. It's deliberate. I
Yeah.
don't see it
Yeah.
in any other fashion. It's because if we ask, there was it was an interesting study. It wasn't a study. The gentleman wasn't really a study. He was in the field, and he was at a fast food restaurant. I can't remember which one it was. They didn't advertise it. And
Yeah.
he went to every car in the fast food, the drive-through,
Yeah.
and he asked the occupants in each car if they thought this food was healthy. And there must have been 20 cars. I don't
Right.
know the exact number.
Yeah.
Not one occupant said yes. Not one
And yet here
occupant.
they are waiting for this
It
food.
is deliberate suicide. They
Yeah. Yeah.
understand, and this is my opinion, they
Yeah.
understand it's not good. And
Yeah.
they're willing to exchange that for a lifelong, from that day on, the potential of health damaging conditions. And that to me is amazing, that
Isn't
people
it
are
strange?
willing to exchange that. And when the people, and I thought it was interesting, this gentleman proved his point when he asked all of the customers at this fast food restaurant
Mm-hmm.
if they felt that this food was healthy for them, and not one person said yes. I even remember two young kids in the back of one car that said it is not, but we like it.
Right. Like, well, yeah.
Explain this to me,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Explain this. It's almost as if people, and I'm just going to be transparent, people we talked about this before, that become obese because of what they do, because of their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not going to judge them. It's important, I feel, for none of us to judge an obese person if they're bad or they're good. But to me, it's interesting that they've achieved this weight through a long process of
Mm-hmm.
eating. It doesn't happen in
Mm-hmm.
one day. And then
Right.
once they achieve the weight, they're not happy.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
bizarre to me. You've
Yeah.
you've worked hard, or worked, so to speak, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's consuming foods, to get to the weight where you are, and now you're not happy with where you are. If you were happy and rejoicing and dancing, I'd honor that. I'd say, good for you. You're happy with
Right.
what you've achieved.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this, Danielle, someone please explain to me the rationale, the mental
Mm-hmm.
rationale of this. I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand it. I really
Yeah.
don't.
No. No. I know. It's again, I think it's instant gratification. It's a disassociation with what food does to your body,
Mm-hmm.
and how important it actually is for every stage of your life. And what you're eating in your 30s affects how you handle things in your 40s and your 50s and beyond. And
Mm-hmm.
people don't make that correlation. And again, like you and I discussed in another podcast, that they just kick it down the road, like, oh well, I'm 40, then I'll start eating better, because then it'll make a difference. But I'm in my 30s, I'm invincible, I can do whatever I want.
It's like the
But the
saving,
fact,
yeah, it's like the
yeah,
saving program, right? It's like
yeah,
I don't
exactly.
have to worry about putting money or saving money until I'm like,
I've got
the,
years. Yeah,
right, the time they're
exactly.
60, they're like, wow, I don't have anything saved.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
getting back, I think it's honorable for us to look at traditional societies that
Mm-hmm.
really almost valued menopause as liberating, a
Oh,
liberation
for
from
sure.
childbearing years.
Right.
And in addition to that, it was a symbol of knowledge and experience.
Mm.
And in many societies and many cultures, a woman that transitioned through menopause was
Mm-hmm.
honored and seen as
Mm.
wisdom, as
Right.
a
Right.
wise
Right.
individual. And I think
Right.
that's a wonderful way of looking at things.
Absolutely.
Now it's the transition, it's that journey, it's that voyage, and making the voyage as
Mm-hmm.
comfortable as possible. And
Right.
what I'm here for on this podcast is to suggest, uh, in the beginning, and for those women that haven't approached perimenopause or anything like that yet, is
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, to be active rather than
Mm.
reactive. Be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Be proactive.
And
Yeah.
really, this is where I encourage people to watch our cooking program as a
Mm-hmm.
general sign of getting an idea how to make and prepare foods that are actually quite good. When I was
Mm-hmm.
doing the show, we had, I think there was 12 individuals that were all fanatics of fast food,
Mm-hmm.
and we had them over to consume the meals that were prepared.
Mm.
And every one of the individuals said that they would eat this without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that are adapted or used to eating fast food, who
Mm-hmm.
literally made the comment that they would
Right.
eat the meals
Yeah.
and pay for them, even,
Right.
which
Right.
was
That's
a
fantastic. Yeah.
tremendous compliment to me, but it was a compliment to the idea of how we can make foods healthy and how
Right.
people can eat healthy foods and they can be satisfied with the taste
Absolutely.
of those foods.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much time we have, but I also wanted to ask you about, are there any other phytohormones that you recommend? Like, what do you think about wild yam? There's a progesterone cream that's made from wild yams. Is that a thing? Is that a real thing?
Not Diascoria. So basically, dehydroepiandrosterone, DHEA, is
Mm-hmm.
taken from plant source.
Okay.
In many cases, there might be other
Yeah.
sources, but in many cases,
Yeah.
it's taken from a plant source. Yam can be used very efficiently and
Mm.
basically meet the demands that the body's going through and meet the symptoms and
Mm-hmm.
diminish those symptoms that might be uncomfortable. So
Mm-hmm.
there's not only that, vitamin E. Some women have mentioned that they've experienced benefits from hot flashes by taking supplemental vitamin E, tocopherol.
Okay.
That's one. Another thing is basically besides DHA, besides vitamin E, there are other people that have mentioned that they receive benefits from taking B2, riboflavin,
Hmm.
and even B6, even B
Hmm.
vitamins in general. Some
Hmm.
women have mentioned that they've received benefits and a lack of symptoms. Black cohosh is another one
Mm-hmm.
that's considered favorable. So there's a wide variety, and I'm just naming a few
Yeah.
of options for women other than HRT. Hormone
Mm-hmm.
replacement therapy, known as menopause hormone therapy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
basically does carry a heavy burden with it.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's to be used, it should be used correctly. Remember, we talked about the analogy use the right tool for the right condition.
Right.
And
Right.
just always remember, it's always important to keep in mind what happens if you use these therapies, these hormones.
Mm-hmm.
What is the
Mm-hmm.
long term potential
Mm-hmm.
with doing that? It's almost like building a house in a high fire zone.
Mm-hmm.
Fire may
Mm-hmm.
not occur, but if it's a high fire risk zone and a fire does
Right.
happen,
Right.
there's a great opportunity that you will lose your house.
Mm-hmm. Right. And now, isn't it, you may be able to shed some light on this. If your doctor orders a hormone panel, those aren't necessarily, they're accurate for that moment, but hormones fluctuate all the time. So is that really not a good indicator of kind of where your hormone levels are?
That is,
Or a blood,
mhm, that is
that is,
correct. Mhm,
okay.
that is correct, because you can have variations. You can have increases of estrogen, as I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
You have changes, and if you want to dial the panel down even more to estradiol, estrase, that whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
have fluctuations, particularly while going through menopause. These things
Mm-hmm.
fluctuate. As I mentioned before, you can have actually an increase of estrogen in some cases, and this is
Mm-hmm.
facilitating the adipose cells. So
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a difficult target to capture if you're doing
Mm-hmm.
blood tests, because that test may be different the next day. It might be different the next hour, because there's
Right.
always
Right.
fluctuations.
Exactly. That's my point. And so
Mhm.
it's not, I think some doctors are reluctant to do it, but I think rightfully so, that it's not an indicator, and it may be great for that hour, or it's going to give them false information
Exactly.
that there's another way to go about this.
Exactly.
Um, yeah.
Exactly. So I once again I want to remind ourselves, what did traditional societies do in the past?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like
Mm-hmm.
menopause is new. It's not like, but what we
No.
do know is that the symptoms of menopause, the discomfort, has increased in
Mm-hmm.
modern day
Mm-hmm.
industrial societies.
Right.
Why?
Right.
What is the
Right.
variable? So
Right.
that's important to understand. If women transition through menopause relatively easily in the past, why don't we return to that type of
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle? And
Right.
obviously, we can't return back to the dark ages, or we can't return
No.
back to,
No.
situation before the industrial times. But it's
No, of
important
course,
to
nor would we
understand.
want to.
Yeah,
But yeah, there
it's
are things that we can do
it's
for
important
sure.
to understand why we have an escalation in the
Mm-hmm.
discomfort of
Mm-hmm.
these symptoms
Right. Right. No,
associated with menopause.
yeah. And do you think there are environmental toxins as well that play a role?
Yes, a contributing
Mm-hmm.
factor. You have
Yeah.
things that are polyvinyl hydrocarbons and things like that we're exposed to it continuously. I
Mm-hmm.
do feel, I'll restate this, I do feel that weight and the gain of adipose fat
Mm-hmm.
as a complementary factor to the escalation of menopause symptoms. I do.
Hmm.
That's my personal
Interesting.
opinion, because what
Mm-hmm.
happens is it throws a lot of variables into the pool as we carry excess amounts of fat. We
Hmm.
have excess amounts of not just fat, but we have excess amount of calories that are being consumed
Mm-hmm.
that don't have to be. They're not necessary. And then
Mm-hmm.
we talk about something such as diabetes. We've talked about this before in previous podcasts. That can escalate the symptoms of menopause dramatically,
Mm-hmm.
because generally the conditions associated with diabetes are what we talk about: obesity,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, if people are taking drugs or medications for that, that's only going to further escalate
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
symptoms of menopause. And I
Right,
think
right.
all of these things coming together, we have to look at what are the variables, and we get back to variables. What are variables when we talk about menopause?
Mm-hmm.
Menopause is not a disease. It is not,
Mm-mm.
but it's treated
No.
like such
Yeah.
because of the severity for what a lot of women go through.
Mm-hmm. I know. Well, and it's tricky too because I know, unfortunately, a lot of women will go to a Western medical doctor and the doctor will just say, "Oh, well, you're going through menopause. You just have to deal with the symptoms. Like, there's nothing we can do for you." And even that is false. And it's also dismissive of like something that they're going through. So they don't even recommend hormone therapy, which is fine, but they don't also recommend maybe changing your diet
Mhm.
or phytochemicals or, phyto-hormones or anything like that.
Right. And
And so I think, yeah,
as you and I
it,
both know, that's generally expected. Not all the time, but generally expected.
yeah,
But if I applaud a physician who is not going to give HRT,
right.
I
But
can't elaborate how dangerous HRTs can be.
right. But I also think that it's detrimental when they're like, "Oh, well, go on an SSRI. They're safe. They'll be fine," because that's not helpful. Or, and also you should be on a statin drug because, everybody your age needs to be on a
Mhm.
statin drug.
Well,
So it's like they,
yeah,
yeah.
it's important to remember that there are so many definitions of depression. Which type of depression are we going to elaborate on? You can
Mm-hmm.
go indefinitely on what
Yeah.
depression is, and just
Yeah.
by categorizing it and saying, okay, this is depression, we're just going to slap you on MAO or SSRI,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just going to leave it at that. I mean, kids are being put
Right.
on SSRIs now,
I know. It's
and
it's wild.
it's the new candy of
Yeah.
the current status is
Yeah.
SSRIs.
Yeah.
So, but basically, menopause. I just want to elaborate that menopause is something. Number one, is not a disease. Number
Mm-mm.
two, it is a condition that can, in my opinion, be managed quite comfortably for women
Mm-hmm.
if the approach is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And number three, it can be health preventative if we let it go through what we
Mm.
naturally have evolved to go through.
Right, right, right. The same way that a drop in testosterone can actually protect the prostate. I mean, I think we've talked about that in men,
Mhm.
that there is that natural dip and it's actually has its own protective benefits,
Mhm. Yes,
And so you don't want to override that just so that for whatever reason.
exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like testosterone for men. The reason prostate cancer is on the increase is because of the not the testosterone, but the conversion of testosterone to
Mm-hmm.
DHT. It's that
Mm.
conversion
Hmm.
due to an enzyme, and that enzyme being highly active because of poor processed, things that influence that enzyme to be highly active, or things that are ingested generally into the
Mm.
system.
Hmm. Again, it goes back to diet.
Mm-hmm.
Diet kind of runs the body, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's why I wanted to have this podcast, is
Yeah.
just a
I think
general
that's great.
informative process of saying
Mm-hmm.
there are ways in which to deal with post, peri, pre, all of that stuff, the
Mm-hmm.
conditions associated with menopause, like osteopenia, osteoporosis, osteomalacia, that type of thing,
Right.
cardiovascular problems,
Right.
obesity, all of these things can be
Right.
addressed relatively well with just managing, and I emphasize this again, managing our diet, managing our lifestyle. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not that hard. I don't know where it's it's a it's arrived at the venue it has where eating good food is bad. or it's
Mm-hmm.
hard, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
know where that's come from.
Yeah.
It came from
Yeah. I
nowhere.
know. No,
Talking to me.
yeah, it's true. And then we'll get off here in 1 second, but I did want to ask, we do have our own line of supplements. Are there things that we have, like our hair serum, for instance? Would that help someone who's going through menopause that might be having thinning hair?
Right.
Would you recommend,
Yes.
you
Well,
know?
for bone health, our alkaline formula,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that could be
To
helpful.
help.
If there's emotional
Mm-hmm.
factors at play, that's where things like the body comfort. I mean, I've had people that have taken diazepam and they say this body comfort works more efficiently and it's
Mm.
safer. It is.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have several different things that we can
Okay.
provide to help.
Right.
But I do encourage people to go to the cooking show, Meehan
Yeah.
Healthline, and look at some of the foods that
Mm-hmm.
are delicious and they're easy to prepare. That's the reason I prepared the show and went through it, is to give a dialogue on how eating healthy is not that difficult.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And I hope we'll get to talk again soon.
Okay, thank you, Danielle.
All right.